This is Popular Front, a podcast focused on the niche details of modern warfare and underreported conflict with me, Jake Hanrahan. Today we're speaking to researcher and analyst Neil P. Hauer. He's been covering the Caucasus for a long time. He's been on the ground in Armenia since the Nagorno-Karabakh war started last month. And as some of you will probably know, the war has come to an end in a very bitter way for the Armenians. They've essentially lost their lands in Nagorno-Karabakh. Azerbaijan has won. Russia is moving peacekeepers into Stepanakert. Neil's been covering it and he's going to explain to us how this happened and what's going on at the moment on the ground in Armenia. If you like what we're doing here at Popular Front, please consider supporting us at patreon.com/popularfront. I think the best thing to do would be go back to what happened. Obviously, the Karabakh war is kind of over now, essentially, but it didn't just end because of military situations. We know there was this very strange deal. Maybe go back to then and just explain to us what happened.
Yeah, so essentially what happened at the end of the war here was this was last week on Monday, the 9th. And so at this point, we knew that the Azerbaijanis we knew here in Armenia and Yerevan, the Azerbaijanis had made a lot of progress, that they had pushed in, and there was fighting in the city of Shushi, which is smack in the middle of Karabakh, and sort of the dominant position, as it's this dominant natural position where it overlooks the capital, but it's about 600 meters above it, despite only being a few kilometers away as the crow flies. And so we knew there was this battle going on there. But the Azerbaijanis had claimed already that they had taken it. I think that was on the 7th that they claimed that, or perhaps it was the 8th, but they claimed that they'd taken it. The Armenians denied it entirely, Armenian Ministry of Defense and everything. So that's all that anyone knew. And then suddenly, on Monday, in the wee hours of actually early Tuesday morning there, about 2 a.m. local time Tuesday morning, suddenly, Nikol Pashinyan, the Prime Minister of Armenia, posts on his Facebook page saying that he's signed a deal to end the Karabakh war, and that this deal essentially, freezes the lines where they are, gives Azerbaijan everything that it's already captured, including Shushi, which he admits has actually fallen, and as well as pulling back from Armenia is pulling back from these other regions surrounding the Karabakh proper that they also controlled. And so basically this was a huge shock to everyone. And within about 10-15 minutes, we saw that, I was just sitting in my apartment and I could hear that there's lots of honking on the street, and went down and there was basically a riot that unfolded on Republic Square there in the center of the city, and protesters smashing into smashing into the government building, the prime minister's residence there, chanting Nikol traitor and other things, and then eventually breaking into the parliament as well.
Right. And tell us about this deal. They've basically, in a crude way, I kind of said it online, but to me it did look as if basically Armenians have kind of lost the whole of Karabakh. I know there's going to be, alleged Russian peacekeepers in Stepanakert, but it's not looking good. What is this deal? Maybe go into a little bit more detail for us on that.
Yeah, so this deal, it's 9 points in it, but essentially the majority of it is, that the Armenians are left with this rump state, which is, it's sort of, in a lot of ways, this deal is basically reflective of what had always been discussed for the last 25 years in the peace process here, except with some additional benefits for Azerbaijan as sort of, the victor's spoils, because they did win on the battlefield here. And so basically what's left is, out of the former Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Oblast, so the Armenian populated region that was at the heart of this dispute, in the center in the center of the territory that the Armenians controlled there. So the former Oblast territory, the ethnic Armenian part, the part of that had remained under Armenian control by the end of the war stays in their hands. And this means, though, that they lose the southern part of it, which the Azerbaijanis had captured, and also Shusha. And these were things that were never on the table before. But the Azerbaijanis basically earned it on the ground. And so now the Armenians, they also have to give up they're in the process of handing back over the so-called 7 occupied regions around Karabakh proper, which were overwhelmingly ethnic Azerbaijani populated, but have been captured as the security buffer zone by the Armenians in 1993. And so they've handed these back, but as well, in the course of this, there's this massive Russian peacekeeping force that's being deployed. And this is the ostensible number of this is 2,000 men, just under 2,000 men, 90 armored vehicles, and 360 various other vehicles. But the Russians have already brought in stuff that wasn't initially in the deal. They've brought in attack helicopters, Grad rocket launchers, lots of electronic warfare, anti-drone technology there. And the flights have been coming in every day. So the Russians have really set up quite a substantial little army down there.
Why are they bringing in stuff that they shouldn't have brought in? I mean, we all know when Russia comes for peacekeeping, they rarely leave. But what do you think their goal is? Why are they bringing all this new equipment?
I think they're basically just ready to fight a full-scale war down there in the territory over the remainder here, if it comes to that. And basically, I think to a large degree that they needed to bring in quite a substantial amount of stuff, given that this deal isn't called at all for. The terms of this deal are still being hammered out, like the specifics of it, because this is one of the problems, is that the deal, as it was announced early on the 10th, does not go into a lot of the specifics, just sort of broad strokes. But how a lot of this is going to play out in reality is not clear. But the deal, as it stands, does not call for the withdrawal of the Azerbaijani armed forces from the front lines, especially in Shusha, which in Shusha they basically can threaten the entirety. They can threaten the capital. They can with artillery just immediately, just by virtue of Shusha's location. And so I think that the Russians felt like they had to pull in a whole lot of stuff there and basically be able to fight like a serious conflict there, not only just to deter the Azerbaijanis, but to deter the Turks as well, who keep insisting that they're part of this peacekeeping mission. And the Azerbaijanis keep saying that the Turks are going to be part of this, but Russia keeps vehemently denying this and saying, no, this is just this is a tripartite deal signed by Russia, Armenia, Azerbaijan. Turkey's not playing any role. But now Turkey its parliament has just approved a bill to send troops to Azerbaijan as well.
Yeah, I read that this morning. They're sending troops, right?
Yeah, it's not clear in what capacity or what amount. It could just be some token force, but it could also be something much more substantial. So that we're going to find out in the next week or two here what that's going to look like. But now Turkey is for the first time in 100 years, since 1920, literally, is sending troops to the South Caucasus. And so the Russians are guarding against that too.
Jesus. Let's just scale back a little bit. So you were in the Parliament building when protesters stormed it. There's some great footage I saw you putting on Twitter from there. Maybe explain that. Like, why were people so angry? They were fighting each other. They said they wanted to kill Pashinyan. They beat up a guy that was literally nothing to do with the deal from Parliament. Just explain that scene for us.
I think it was really all this just exploded out as just that people were stunned by this. I was really surprised to see it announced so suddenly, the deal, even though I was very aware that the war was not going well for the Armenians. But I think the vast majority of people here, including very educated people, really felt like a lot of people bought the government propaganda that we're beating them and their gains are only temporary and they've taken massive losses, unsustainable losses, and they're going to sue for peace. And then the other thing is, whenever you suggested to someone here over the 6 weeks of the war that, things might not be going well for Armenia, they would just laugh and say, yeah, but in the 90s, we were also losing for a while and then we won. And it was just this in the 90s and we'll come back and we'll take it all back and we'll come back and we won't end up losing anything here. We'll beat the Azerbaijanis. Like, I think there really was this real sense here that we beat the Azerbaijanis before, and now for 26 years we've been sitting here. We're sitting pretty. We haven't lost anything. And in that time, we've just consolidated our hold over it. And there's no way that we'll ever just definitively lose to the Azerbaijanis. And then we will just permanently lose territory, basically. And so when that suddenly came out that that's what had happened, everyone was in shock. Absolutely. The initial in that night there, the when just after it had come out, that initial explosion of violence was really just people acting out on that, and it wasn't necessarily anything sustained or directed at the government, or it wasn't necessarily a sign of overall frustrations with the government or just widespread sustained anger at the government, but it was just this massive explosion of outrage from people and just shock at seeing that this unravel before their eyes.
Yeah, it did. I mean, I can imagine it was kind of, I got a lot of Armenian friends, and for them, they knew that the government propaganda was kind of bullshit, but it was soul destroying. You could just see it. There was a lot of weird kind of talk around that time. Some were saying like Pashinyan had been like strong-armed into it. There was some talk that the guy running Nagorno-Karabakh from the Armenian side was going to be arrested. Pashinyan's wife was still on the front line. Like, did that amount to anything? Was anything fishy going on?
I don't particularly think so. I mean, honestly, I thought that I was pretty surprised that this deal happened, in the sense that I was surprised that the Azerbaijanis agreed to it, because they had said from the start of this that this is it. We're taking back all of our occupied territory, meaning the entirety of not only these seven occupied regions, but Karabakh itself, and saying we are liberating all of our lands, the de jure territory of Azerbaijan, from occupation. And frankly, they were on, as the Pashinyan, as the leader of Karabakh himself, said that the Azerbaijanis were on the verge of this. Like, they had taken Shushi, and they had basically, I mean, the Armenian army was in a rout, and the writing was on the wall. And so, it would have been bloody. It would have taken like a few more weeks probably, in like street to street fighting in Stepanakert, but the outcome would not have been in doubt. So I was surprised more so that the Azerbaijanis agreed to this. But I guess, some stuff happened behind the scenes with the Russians and the Turks, and they managed to sort this out, and they got them to agree. But I mean, I think, frankly, given the way that things were going, that this is a pretty good outcome for the Armenians, given that they were not only on the verge of losing it all, but now, I mean, the Russians are there and in great force, and the term of the Russian stay is only 5 years, but I don't think they're ever going to leave. And at that rate, that basically seals assuming that they're not just going to pack up and leave, as the deal says, they might have to in 5 years, then this territory is gone for good for the Azerbaijanis. They never get it back.
Yeah, and for any of our listeners that are not aware, Sushi is basically an elevated place, right near Stepanakert. Would have been perfect to attack Stepanakert from, had the war carried on. I mean, from the Azeris' point of view, it would have been perfect for them. And one thing that I don't know, I just keep going over, and, correct me if I'm wrong, a lot more about Russia and the Caucasus than me, but I feel like this was a little bit of a plan from Putin. So we already know that, Pashinyan is not up Putin's ass the same way the previous kind of people running Armenia were. I do feel like this is a little bit kind of Putin saying, like, if you couldn't hear, you'll feel, which obviously Pashinyan has now felt because the state of the situation. Azerbaijan, Putin has deals with them with gas pipelines and whatnot. And now with Turkey as well, we're seeing them pull back from previous positions in Idlib, which Russia wanted them to before. I don't know. To me, it feels like a very kind of 4D chess-like plan was played by Putin from the start. I don't know. What do you think, Neil?
I mean, I never really liked this narrative that Putin is punishing Pashinyan because he came to power in a color revolution, let's say. But
he was quite close to the EU, right? Like, he was closer to the EU than the previous guys, or at least snuggling up to them a little bit, to Europe.
True, yeah, he was, and he has people in his cabinet too, and he made disparaging remarks about Russia, and Putin certainly doesn't particularly like him, but at the same time, I mean, Armenia has continued under Pashinyan to participate in every Russian political bloc, economic bloc, military alliance, military exercises. They remain, still completely committed to everything that they were already in, and it's not like they were going to like they hadn't joined the Eurasian Economic Union or something. They were going to pull out. No, like they are still committed to that. And I think it's a lot simpler for this in terms of that basically, Russia was just, when this war broke out, Russia, and during the whole course of it, Russia was in a really awkward position. And that, this was unfolding, and if they were going to go in there and just intervene on the side of Armenia to stop Azerbaijan, then it would have been like sort of logistically difficult, because let's say they take their stuff from the base they have here at Gyumri down there, and they start intervening on this. They start fighting the Azerbaijanis. And what if the Azerbaijanis just escalate with Turkish support against them? Then, they're in a really awkward position then, because it's hard for them to get the cargo there. And then now you're in a hot war that you don't really want to be in. And that's just much more dangerous. And then also, if the Russians intervene militarily on the side of the Armenians, then they basically just lose all their influence or the vast majority of their influence with Azerbaijan just immediately. And that's what they were trying to do this whole time, is play both sides and, still retain good relations with the Azerbaijanis. Because as far as Putin's concerned, Ilham Aliyev is sort of like the kind of leader that he can trust, he can deal with, and doesn't rock the boat against Russia too much. And
right, he likes dictators.
Yeah, exactly. Ilham Aliyev has been in power for 17 years. He's a known quantity. And so the Russians were just sort of in this awkward position where they needed the fighting to stop, but they also now, the new dynamic in this conflict was that for the first time, you had Turkey come in here and fully diplomatically back, and also to various degrees militarily back Azerbaijan, and deploy officers for command and control on the ground, and deploy drones and pilots basically on the Azerbaijani side. And so this was something that Russia was basically unprepared for. And so at the end of the day, I think like this sort of deal that the Russians ended up working out, and that Putin revealed 2 days ago, that was also sorted out. There was a similar sort of deal that was agreed by the Azerbaijanis on the October 20th, a few weeks ago, but that the Armenians refused. That actually would have ended up better for them than what we have now. But this is basically how it went for the Russians. They were just in an awkward position and didn't have a whole lot of good choices.
Right. Well, thanks for clearing that up. I'll take my tinfoil helmet off for now, but that definitely makes sense. You've been in Karabakh. I know you was there when the war was like at the height of the war, but you've been in Karabakh since, right? Like since this is all kind of calmed down, it's all lost essentially. Like what's the feeling there now? What's it look like?
I've not been back to Stepanakert, the capital. I'm hoping to get back there in a few days here. But I was in a week ago today. Yeah, I was in Kelbajar, which is one of the occupied regions around Karabakh proper that the Armenians were handing back. And so this is, at that point, it was due to be handed back. Just 3 days after that, on the 15th, they ended up extending it on the 15th. They extended the deadline to the 25th, but it was pretty dire there in terms of, this region was not hugely populated. There was about 3,000 Armenians living there, all of whom had moved in the past, let's say the past 20 years to the region and been resettled there. But now this region is being given back to Azerbaijan. And so it was people stripping their houses, taking stuff back to Yerevan, some of them hedging their bets, hoping they'll be able to stay under Azerbaijani control, or seeing how that will work in practice, and lots of other people, burning their houses there. And there was big concern about the one famous monastery too, the Dadavank monastery, that this would come under Azerbaijani control. But it seems now that the Russians have deployed the peacekeepers into that area, so the Russians have just bumped the line up a little bit from what was initially agreed, as they're wont to do, and now they've taken that into this monastery into the control of the Russian defended area.
Right. I guess I got a kind of big question here that can't really be answered, in any positive way, because we don't know what's going to happen in the future. But I just want to go over something that I think a lot of reporters are, for some reason, ignoring in their coverage. So we have seen several videos of Azeri troops cutting off ears, beheading people. We've also seen one video of an Armenian cutting off ears as well, I should say. Within a day of this situation, I saw footage of what was alleged to be one of the Turkish-backed mercenaries stood on top of a 5th century church screaming Allahu Akbar. My point is, like, are Armenians going to be safe? Like, if they stay in their areas that Azerbaijan are taken over, which Azerbaijan has said, yeah, they can stay. Let's not forget in 2005, they told the German court that they want to do a Holocaust on Armenians. But anyway, they have said they can stay. Yeah. Are they safe? What do you think? Is it going to be all right? Or I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, basically, there's very few people who were left in those areas that they captured because everyone had fled ahead of time, you know?
Oh, okay.
So there's some people who stay there. There are definitely some elderly people who stay behind and were killed and where stories are still coming out. But we know that they have executed civilians that remain behind in these areas. But what's more likely to happen and what the bigger picture is essentially that the people who lived in these areas will be basically permanently displaced now. And I've seen different estimates going around. Because they did capture a handful of, a good number of Armenian populated villages, and then two fairly major towns in Hadrut and Shushi, which were each about 4,000 people. So probably there's about 25,000 people who will be displaced as a result of this. And I mean, it is pretty inconceivable that any of these people would go back under two areas that would be under Azerbaijani control. There might be some sort of special exception for Shushi because we're sort of waiting to see what will happen with the final status of that, whether the Russians will just basically, maybe the Russians will do something because the Russians are in it already, and the Russians might give it some sort of dual status or something. But aside from that, basically what's going to happen is, you're going to have 25,000 people permanently displaced from these areas. And just having to, a few, whoever remain behind, probably things are going to go, if there's anyone left alive, probably things are not going to go very well for them. But by and large, it's just going to be, this new wave of displacement from the conflict.
Yeah. There's one thing I wanted to ask you about. I don't know if you'll know or not, but there was some Armenians who are over there sent images of graves that had been dug up. Now, I don't know. They're saying, the Azeris are digging up the bodies, but I've also heard that it's people kind of taking the bodies of their loved ones with them just in case. Do you know anything about this?
Yeah, I only saw one video like that, but it was some Armenian guys in Kelbajar, digging up the grave of their relatives to bring it back to rebury them in Armenia,
right,
or in the remaining part of Karabakh. Grave desecrations I haven't seen yet.
No, I've seen graffiti on churches, but like you, I thought, no, this looks like they've taken the families with them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's the only video I've seen so far like that was the guys, digging up their relative to bring him back.
All right, cool, man. Thanks. What's going on for Pashinyan then? Like, is he finished? I know there's a bit of a political turmoil. I saw someone saying that there's going to be a vote of no confidence. I don't fully understand the politics in Armenia. What's happening?
I mean, it's really confusing at this point because, there was definitely, of course, this would be a really hard situation for anyone to survive losing this war like this. But support for Pashinyan was pretty high before this. So it was still very high, really, after 2 years in office. And basically, I mean, it was a tough situation for him. And then about 4 or 5 days ago, he made this idiotic post on Facebook, as he does want to do, just after midnight, basically in this sort of coded language saying, it's coded but pretty clear language, telling the soldiers on the front line to come back to Yerevan and deal with the people who are whining, basically deal with these opposition protesters. Which really was a bad move by him and made everyone, even the people who were defending him, really angry. And there was some momentum building at that point. There was the foreign minister resigned, the minister of emergency situations shortly after resigned, a few other MPs from his party, and even the president, who's mostly ceremonial, called for him to resign. But at this point, the momentum seems to have died down from that a little bit. So it's hard to say what's going to happen here. I thought he was done after the president said he should resign because, the president is the guy who's currently president, Armin Sarkisian, is the one of the few guys who's respected across the spectrum here and has contacts with everyone. And basically, he's not going to say that unless he thinks that there is already this is the way the winds are blowing. But now we've gone on a few more days, and the momentum seems to have gone out a little bit. I mean, there's still these anti-Pashinyan demonstrations here, but I was at one yesterday. It wasn't tiny, but it wasn't huge either. And so the momentum seems to be failing a bit. But I guess the bigger test will be when they lift martial law here, at which point you can do a vote of no confidence in the government. And basically, because that's still in place here, and until they do that, you can't really make many changes politically. So if he survives that, they lift the martial law here, and his ouster doesn't come about immediately in like the next few days after that, and he stops making stupid posts on Facebook after midnight after a few drinks, then I think he'll be fine.
Right. What's the situation now for soldiers? There's someone that we know through Popular Front was like FaceTiming people he knows out there, and they were still on the front line. Now, obviously, they're not fighting, but they were still kind of just told to stay where they're meant to be. They seem confused from what I understand. You know what's going on right now with them all?
Yeah, I mean, this is another confusing thing about the agreement, because there's a lot of people who either speculated or assumed here as well that it meant that the Armenians had to disarm, and it was only be the Russians there, but that doesn't seem to be the case. And basically, the units sort of froze where they were. I mean, some of them demobilized, at least like the recent call-ups, because I have a friend who was called up basically about, let's say, 2 weeks before the end of the war, and he's back now. But I think along the sections of the front line where they held, there still are units present on the front. Basically, the Russians have set up posts, but the frontline positions, remained as they were. And the more interesting thing is in the northwest, in this Kelbajar region, which was supposed to be handed over on November. The deal. So after the deal was signed on November 10th, and this region was supposed to be handed over by the 15th. So just 5 days for to give it over. But then they ended up extending the deadline for 10 days to the 25th. And people said that's because, there's Armenian units there that were refusing to stand down. And now there's been some videos that have come out of Russians going around in their trucks and loudspeakers telling the Armenian holdouts there that they have to put down their arms and surrender and just vacate the area because this is about to be handed over. I think, a lot or most of the soldiers there have done that. There's also this feeling there that, the Azerbaijan, from the point of view of the soldiers there, that the Azerbaijanis didn't advance here. We held our ground in this sector of the front. Why should we be told to surrender and give up here and vacate? And so that's an interesting situation to keep an eye on here as November 25th starts coming up, the next deadline.
That is interesting. I wasn't aware that the Russians have been telling them to kind of leave. I guess that leaves the question, do you think there's possibility of guerrilla attacks against the Azeris or small insurgencies in the future?
It's definitely possible to some degree, at least. I mean, in most of these areas, there's not going to be a civilian support base, because there won't be any Armenian civilians there. But also, a lot of these territories are, especially in the northwest in Kelbajar, it's really remote and mountainous, and it wasn't super heavily populated before the war, and now it's going to be. It's even in sort of a cutoff position from the rest of. I was wondering how are the Azerbaijanis going to even get in there, given that the only connection from Kelbajar to the rest of Azerbaijan is in the north, and there's a big mountain range in the north. There's no roads, so I don't know how they're going to get in there in the first place. But then even when they do, they'll be sort of cut off. So it'll be a really weird situation there. And I could definitely see something turning ugly at one point or another here. Things have held for the past week and a half that this has been in place. But I think at some point, I'm sure that there's going to be an issue down the line here. Just because the Armenians, the Azeris hate each other so much, and it's really hard for me to see this just all going completely smoothly for the entirety of this process.
Yeah, that's a good point. Mountains as well, like as we know, just perfect ground for like guerrilla activity, really. And I guess they know those mountains, right? Yeah. They've been there for however long.
Yeah, so I definitely think you're going to have at least, and I mean, it looks like in Kelbajar, it might be sooner rather than later if the Azeris actually do just come rolling in there on however they're going to do it, and from helicopters or something on the 25th, and they can't get, and there's still some Armenians who have hit out behind there, so it very well could end up being like that, but sooner rather than later.
Where can people find you, follow your work, what have you, your website, Twitter, all of that?
You can check me out on Twitter, is where I post most of my content. It's twitter.com/Neil P. Hauer, Hauer. And then I also on Patreon, if you want to get a little bonus content, maybe support me a little bit, because I am a freelancer, and that's patreon.com/Neil Hauer, NeilHauer.
Excellent. Thank you very much, mate. Be in touch.
Absolutely. Thank you too, man. Have a good one.
Soon. Later. That was Neil Hauer speaking about the bitter end to the Karabakh War and how this weird situation there probably means it isn't actually the end. It looks like a lot is probably going to be going on there, especially in and around the mountains in Karabakh. Definitely stay tuned to Popular Front. We'll be reporting on it as it happens. I'm looking to go to Armenia in December, all being well. You will see the footage that we get from there on the YouTube. But like Neil said, he's an independent journalist. Definitely check him out. Just in case you missed that at the end, his Patreon is patreon.com/Neil Hauer. You spell his surname Heur. Check him out. If you like what we're doing at Popular Front, you want to see us keep doing more, you want more content, definitely check us out at patreon.com/Popular Front. You will get it all there. The website is popularfront.co. youtube.com/Popular Front. The brand new 3D printed gun documentary, 3D printed guns in Western Europe, super spicy and illegal. That doc will be coming out. I thought it was going to be out this weekend, but it's not. Next week now, the very start of next week, it will be there. It will be coming to Patreons first, mind you. So patreon.com/Popular Front. Our Instagram is instagram.com/popular.front. The Twitter is twitter.com/popularfrontco. The outro music is by Sam Black. Check his music out at samblackpf.com. Thank you to our sponsors. They are Oracle Coffee Shop in Portland, Oregon, USA. They're an independent coffee shop selling only fair trade products. See them at 3875 Southwest Bond Avenue, 97239. Go say hi to my mate Frank there. Check them out. Thank you to our other sponsor, Grind Core House. They're a pair of independent coffee shops in Philadelphia, USA. One in South, one in West. Check them out on social media at Grind Core House. Thank you to our other sponsor, Propagandopolis, an outlet selling and informing people about historical conflict propaganda. Get your print at propagandopolis.com. If you use the code POPULARFRONT10 at checkout, you get 10% off. That's PROPAGADOPOLIS. And I just wanted to dedicate this episode to the memory of a friend of mine, sadly, who passed away this week. Very, very good guy. He was very interested in geopolitics. Rest in peace, Archie. Love you, mate. This is dedicated to you, bro. Thank you to the top tier Patreons. They are Damien Boyd, Larson8669, Bad Nads, Bjorn Kirsten, Michael O'Connor, Hapet Yegizayan, apologies if I've said that wrong, mate, Zach Packard, Todd Cravens, Alexander, Nicholas Butter, Ron Swanson, JD, Jav, Bastian Gamillo Rittmeyer, Ian Froese, James Cully, Michael Akakan, Ethan Reyes, Fitz Madrid, Joe Watt, Alex Northrop, Ed Coulthard, Johnny LaFleur, Clayton Taylor, Hugo Newski, Mike Barone, Scott Hopton, Liam Williams, Chris Cusimano, Degenerate Zero Alpha, Giorgio Arani, D.R., Trey Nance. Fuck's sake. What happened? I think my thing cut out. Anyway. Trey Nance, Charlie, Amy Rupert, Rubicon, Mink, Frank Austin, Amelia Mee, Christina Rivetti, Freya Northman, Ali Hunter, Moody Al-Rashid, Maxwell Burke, Bill Wilson, Andrew Hurley, Vida Provost, Brian McLaughlin, Tom Lochrin, Harry from the Discord, Young Wasabi, Sarushe Hawazi, Tony Bin, Adam Berg Snyder, Sebastian from the Discord, Stephen Davila, Anthony Kabarek, Patrick Bronte, Dan Dunham, Fletcher Tate, Chad Walker, Diana Gorvanek, Q Ball, Lawrence Abrahams, Peter McCormick from What Bitcoin Did, Emily Molly, Axel Iverson, Christopher Martin. What the fuck is wrong with this thing? Computer went million. Fucking Big Sur is a nightmare. Ryan Sandercock, Maurice Zumbwall, Kay Hardy Roberts, and Joanne Stocker. If I've missed your name out there, it's either because my computer just went bonkers, or like Patreon has this new, the UI on Patreon is an absolute joke. And there's a chance I didn't see your name, so apologies. Message me if I didn't, if I pronounced it all wrong. Cheers, thanks very much.